They weren't just movies. They were adrenaline-fueled dreams carved into VHS tapes and Saturday afternoons. Back in the late 80s and 90s, Hollywood flirted with a new kind of cool: gritty, neon-lit, and rolling on wheels. Skateboards, BMX bikes, and inline skates weren't just props, they were the story. These films didn't win Oscars, but they won hearts, especially the ones that beat faster every time a trick landed or a villain got served in a downhill race. This is the forgotten world of radical sports cinema, the films that dared to turn pavement into poetry, and the ones that never really left the minds of those who watched them, usually way past bedtime. In the early 90s, Hollywood didn't quite know what to do with rollerblades. They were fast, flashy, and everywhere, from beach boardwalks to suburban cul-de-sacs, but turning them into cinema gold was another story. And that's where Airborne rolled in. At first glance, it looks like your typical fish-out-of-water teen movie. Mitchell Goosen, a laid-back, ocean-loving surfer from California, is sent to live with his relatives in Cincinnati after his parents take a work trip to Australia. It's midwinter, the sky is gray, the streets are covered in slush, and the only waves in sight are the angry crowds of high school hockey players who immediately make Mitchell their target. He's got a ponytail, a Zen mindset, and inline skates, three things that don't exactly scream Midwestern toughness. But then the film starts to shift. What could have been just another throwaway teen flick about a kid trying to fit in becomes something a little more unusual, even poetic. Mitchell doesn't fight back with fists or insults. He glides, literally. While the others are swinging sticks and pushing each other in locker rooms, he's out there carving up the pavement, floating through the city like he belongs to some other dimension. The movie's tone begins to follow his lead, trading teen angst for something almost meditative. And then comes the downhill race. It's the moment Airborne earns its name. Filmed with surprising intensity and real stunt work, the final chase down Devil's Backbone is kinetic, dangerous, and beautifully shot. You feel every turn, every bump, every breath. It's not just about winning the race, it's about release. About proving that style, calm, and grace have their own kind of strength. That skating isn't a gimmick, it's freedom. The performances are charming in that early 90s Disney meets daytime drama kind of way, with a young Seth Green adding comic relief and Jack Black showing up long before he became, well, Jack Black. But it's Shane McDermott's Mitchell, understated, kind of weird, kind of wonderful, who gives the film its center. Airborne wasn't a hit. Critics barely noticed it. Theaters didn't keep it around long. But those who caught it, whether on cable reruns or in faded VHS sleeves at the local video store, remembered it. Not because it was perfect, but because it was different. It dared to slow down a genre built on energy drinks and trash talk. It was about balance, in motion, in life, in identity. And years later, long after the wheels stopped spinning, Airborne still moves. Just not in the way you'd expect. Long before it became a cult legend, Rad was just another mid-80s underdog story, released quietly, dismissed by critics, and barely noticed at the box office. But while mainstream audiences moved on, something strange happened. The kids didn't forget. In fact, they never let it go. The story follows Crew Jones, a teenager from a small town with one dream, to qualify for Hell Track, the most dangerous and high-profile BMX race in the country. It's the kind of race no one expects a local kid to even attempt, let alone win. The rules are stacked, the competitors are sponsored pros, and the course itself looks like it was designed to break bones. But Crew isn't in it for money or fame. He's in it because riding is what he loves, and because doing the impossible is the only way he knows how to live. What makes Rad more than just another sports movie is the way it leans into its own energy. It doesn't hold back. The tricks are wild, the pacing is relentless, and the music, oh, the music, is pure, unapologetic 80s adrenaline. There's a scene where Crew rides his bike to a school dance and literally performs a choreographed BMX routine with his love interest on the gym floor. There's something deeply sincere about the way this movie treats its subject. It's not ironic. It's not trying to be cool. It just is. And maybe that's why it stuck around. For years, it was nearly impossible to find a legal copy. Fans passed around grainy VHS recordings, hosting garage screenings and quoting lines like gospel. Eventually, it earned its rightful place as one of the most beloved underground sports films of all time. Rad isn't polished. It's not particularly nuanced, but it's bursting with heart. It's about chasing something bigger than yourself, even if the odds are absurd and the gatekeepers are laughing in your face. Crew doesn't just ride Helltrack, he breaks through it. And in doing so, he gave every kid with a second-hand bike and a big dream permission to believe that maybe, just maybe, being underestimated is your greatest weapon. Los Angeles in the 1980s had a pulse like no other. Punk bands were tearing up dive bars on Sunset Boulevard. Venice Beach was a playground for outcasts and daredevils. And skateboarding, raw, loud, and defiantly underground, wasn't just a sport. It was a statement. That's the backdrop for Thrashen, a film that doesn't just feature skateboarding, it lives and breathes it. Released in 1986, the movie follows Corey Webster, a clean-cut, fiercely talented skater who heads to LA with dreams of going pro. But instead of finding sponsors and sunshine, he lands in the middle of a turf war. A battle between rival skate gangs where boards are weapons, and loyalty runs as deep as concrete scars. At the center of the chaos is Chrissy, the younger sister of Hook, the leader of the punk-infused Daggers crew. She's free-spirited, sharp, and instantly drawn to Corey, who represents everything her brother hates: control, competition, and a shot at something bigger. What unfolds is part Romeo and Juliet, part rebel sports flick, and completely soaked in the culture of the time. Unlike other sanitized portrayals of youth sports, Thrashen feels authentic, dirty in the best way. It's full of graffiti-tagged ramps, alleyway confrontations, and real-deal skating by legends like Tony Alva and Tony Hawk, who appear in the film before they were household names. The tricks aren't polished or perfect. They're fast, fearless, and filmed with just enough grit to make your palms sweat. Josh Brolin, in his first major role, plays Corey with a mix of innocence and quiet intensity. He's not flashy, but you believe him, as a skater, as a kid trying to make something of himself, and as someone who's falling hard for a girl who's technically off limits. The chemistry between him and Chrissy isn't just believable. It's surprisingly tender, giving the film an emotional undercurrent that sticks long after the race scenes fade. And then there's the soundtrack, a mix of punk and hard rock that perfectly matches the film's scrappy energy. Songs like Thrashen by Meatloaf and performances by the Red Hot Chili Peppers, yes, that Red Hot Chili Peppers, capture the chaotic spirit of a generation trying to grind its way through life, one curb at a time. Thrashen didn't pretend to be a serious movie. It wasn't made to win awards. But what it did was capture a moment, a wild, transitional slice of California youth culture where skateboarding wasn't an Olympic sport or a billion-dollar brand. It was defiance, movement, identity. And while the film may be a bit dated, that's part of its charm. Every neon tank top, every nighttime downhill race, every scream from a dagger skating through traffic feels like it belongs to a different world, one where rebellion wasn't just a phase, it was a way of getting from point A to point B, without asking permission. By the end of the 80s, skateboarding was already on its way to becoming mainstream, but it still hadn't fully shaken off its reputation as a reckless, anti-authority subculture. That's what made Gleaming the Cube such a strange and unexpected entry in the world of radical sports films. Because it didn't just use skateboarding as style, it tried to say something deeper. Released in 1989, the movie stars Christian Slater as Brian Kelly, a bleach-blonde suburban skater who lives for empty pools, homemade ramps, and pushing limits. But when his adopted brother, a quiet and studious Vietnamese teenager named Vin, is found dead under suspicious circumstances, the story takes a sharp turn. Suddenly, Brian's not just skating to escape, he's skating toward the truth. What starts out feeling like a standard teen drama quickly morphs into a hybrid of genres, part detective story, part Cold War thriller, and part coming-of-age tale buried under a punk hoodie and a pair of high-top Vans. And surprisingly, it works. Slater brings a raw edge to Brian, a kid who's angry, grieving, and misunderstood, but never entirely lost. He doesn't become a superhero or a savior. He just becomes aware of corruption, of injustice, of what it means to actually care about something and fight for it. The film treats skateboarding as more than a gimmick. It's Brian's lifeline, the only thing that makes sense when the world around him doesn't. The cinematography reflects that too. Long, flowing shots of him weaving through traffic, ducking under bridges, skating through grief like it's something he can physically outrun. The sound of wheels on concrete becomes its own language. And then there's the title. Gleaming the Cube. It doesn't refer to any real trick. It's more of a metaphor, lifted from an obscure skateboarding phrase that essentially means pushing yourself beyond what's possible. It's abstract, sure, but it fits. Because this movie isn't about nailing a perfect line. It's about finding meaning in the chaos and carving a path forward, even when the road disappears under your feet. Critics didn't know what to make of it at the time. Was it too dark for a skate movie? Too weird for a thriller? Too sincere for either? Maybe. But it didn't matter. For a certain group of viewers, Gleaming the Cube hit like nothing else. It wasn't just cool, it meant something. It showed that behind every fearless drop-in, there might be a kid carrying more than just a board. By the time the late 90s rolled around, the culture of extreme sports had started to shift. Skate parks were popping up in the suburbs, rollerblades were everywhere. And suddenly what was once rebellious and underground was being packaged, marketed, and sold, with corporate logos slapped across every helmet and jersey. That's exactly the moment Disney decided to roll into the conversation. And somehow, they got it weirdly right. Brink premiered on the Disney Channel in 1998, and while it was technically a made-for-TV movie for an entire generation of kids, it was something else entirely. A mission statement, a code, a feeling. The story centers on Andy Brink Brinker, a high school kid from Southern California who lives to skate, specifically to soul skate. That's what he and his friends call it. Skating for fun, for freedom, for the love of movement. They're not chasing prize money or endorsements. They're chasing that moment when the world falls away and it's just you, your wheels, and the road ahead. But when Brink's family hits financial trouble, he secretly joins a rival, corporate-sponsored skating team, the X-Blads, led by an arrogant, ultra-competitive skater named Val. The tension between skating for money versus skating for passion becomes the movie's core conflict. And yes, it's framed in classic Disney fashion, complete with one-liners, montages, and exaggerated villains. But there's something surprisingly honest beneath the surface. Brink works because it respects its audience. It never talks down to them. It understands that even at 14, kids wrestle with real choices between who they are and who the world is pressuring them to be, between loyalty and ambition, between passion and paycheck. The performances are pure 90s Disney. Bright-eyed, full of heart, and just rough enough around the edges to feel genuine. Eric Von Detten, who plays Brink, brings an easy likability that carries the film, while the skating scenes, though clearly choreographed, have enough speed and energy to feel alive. And while it might be tempting to dismiss Brink as just another throwback TV movie, its legacy says otherwise. Ask anyone who grew up watching it, and they'll tell you, this wasn't just a fun distraction. It was formative. It taught you that being good isn't as important as being true. That selling out isn't just about money. It's about losing the spark that made you start skating in the first place. Brink may have aired on Disney Channel, but it had soul, and it left a mark far bigger than anyone expected. There's a certain kind of movie that you remember not because it was good, but because it was weird. The kind of film that lives in the back of your memory like a dream you're not entirely sure actually happened. And for many kids growing up in the early 90s, The Skateboard Kid is exactly that kind of film. Released in 1993, this movie is, well, different. It follows Zach, a shy, awkward kid trying to survive a new school, bullies, and the usual trials of preteen life. But things take a turn when he discovers a mysterious skateboard, one that talks, flies, thinks for itself, and for some reason, sounds like it belongs in a Saturday morning cartoon. Literally. The board becomes Zach's best friend, mentor, and partner in mischief. It helps him stand up to bullies, impress girls, and gain the confidence he never had on his own. If it sounds like E.T. meets Tony Hawk, with a dash of slapstick and a lot of 90s cheese, well, that's because it kind of is. The animation is clunky, the dialogue is goofy, and the logic of the story, even by kids' movie standards, barely holds together. But still, The Skateboard Kid has something that keeps it from being completely forgettable. Pure, unfiltered imagination. This is a film made at a time when studios were throwing anything at the wall to see what might stick. And this one stuck in the weirdest way. It's not grounded in realism, and it's definitely not about the technical skill or street cred of skateboarding. It's about wish fulfillment, about what it would feel like if your skateboard could talk back, fly you to school, and help you finally be seen. It's kitschy, it's ridiculous, and honestly, it's kind of charming, because for all its bizarre choices and questionable execution, there's a sincerity to the Skateboard Kid that's hard to deny. It believes in its own magic, and maybe that's why, all these years later, it still lingers in the minds of those who watched it through the static of a tube TV on a lazy Saturday afternoon. If the Skateboard Kid was strange, then its sequel is something else entirely. A full-throttle dive into 90s direct-to-video absurdity, where logic takes a backseat to spectacle, and the only rule seems to be, if it sounds too ridiculous to work, do it anyway. Released in 1995, The Skateboard Kid 2 brings back the concept of a magical talking skateboard, but turns the volume and the weirdness all the way up. This time, the board doesn't just talk. It laughs, it taunts, it zips through traffic with a new voice and attitude, and somehow it even sprouts rocket boosters. That's right. The skateboard can now fly. Faster. Why? Because why not? The plot, loosely stitched together with recycled tropes, follows a new kid named Sammy, who discovers the legendary board and gets caught up in yet another series of misadventures involving shady adults, over-the-top villains, and cartoon-level chaos. The tone is more frantic than fun, more slapstick than story. But buried somewhere in the madness is that same core idea. What if something ordinary could make you extraordinary? And honestly, that's probably why this sequel still exists in the minds of those who watched it at the right age. Because even when it stops making sense, which happens often, it never stops trying to be fun. It doesn't care about being cool or realistic or even coherent. It just wants to entertain. And in its own bizarre, outdated way, it kind of does. Sure, The Skateboard Kid 2 marks the end of the line for this particular brand of extreme sports fantasy. And yes, it leans harder into gimmicks than any of the films that came before it. But there's something weirdly admirable about a movie that goes this far off the rails without ever pretending it's doing anything else. It's the cinematic equivalent of a kid in the 90s strapping fireworks to the back of their toy. Completely bonkers, mostly unnecessary, but somehow unforgettable. And maybe, in its own chaotic way, that's the perfect way to close out this chapter of radical sports cinema. Not with a graceful trick or emotional breakthrough, but with a board that flies off into the sky, trailing sparks and laughter.